Hi everyone, happy Friday. Thanks for joining Automation Hour. So let's get started. For those of you joining for the first time, we meet every other Friday from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern. And for our upcoming sessions, we have 3 in June with 2 MVPs and a user group co-leader. And in July and early August, your co-hosts are coming back and doing presentations for you. So definitely go and register for those as well. And if you're out in the audience and you have a cool process automation use case and solution that you would like to share with the community, submit your idea into our website and we will reach out to you. We will be reaching out to folks shortly to schedule the upcoming sessions, August and outward. So logistics-wise, all lines are muted, so do use the question function to post questions throughout the session. They could be questions that are tied to the presentation itself or overall automation questions that you have, and we will continue on the discussion in the success community, and that is Salesforce Automation Hour. You can also go on to our website as well, automationhour.com. And a shout out to our sponsor, Concrete.io. And here are your 3 co-hosts. I have on with me David and Rakesh. And with that, I am happy to present our presenter for today, Kothai. So let me change the presenter right to her. She did do a presentation at Dreamforce with the previous product manager for process automation, Shelley Erksat. So with that, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right, my name is Kothai Sengodan, and I currently work for CenturyLink. We are a large global communications, hosting, cloud, and IT services company. I have 6 years of Salesforce experience. I'm a 2-time Dreamforce presenter. I have 2 Salesforce certifications. One is the admin certificate, and the other one's the platform app builder certification. I am currently working towards my Developer 1 certification. And during my free time, I volunteer as a sysadmin for a nonprofit organization called Range of Motion Project. They provide prosthetic limbs to people in need of them in third world countries. And prior to Salesforce, I was a Java developer building enterprise applications using Java JEE technologies. So we at CenturyLink had a business need where we were looking to switch from our custom Apex lead conversion to Salesforce's standard lead conversion. So majority of our accounts come from lead conversion, and the goal is to reduce the duplicate accounts from being created during lead conversion by using the account duplication rules. And Salesforce's standard lead conversion does a great job of handling account duplicate rules. But it also comes with a few shortcomings, and a couple of shortcomings for which we are going to look at a solution today is the first one is the standard lead conversion does not give you an option to pick an opportunity record type during the lead conversion process. What Salesforce does is that they use the user's default record type on the opportunity. And this is not going to work for us. We needed the user to be able to pick the opportunity record type during the lead conversion process. And the second business need that we have is that we have service locations that are tied to leads. This is a related list on the lead. And we needed a way to migrate these service locations to the converted account and opportunity as part of the lead conversion process. And there was no solution to this as part of the standard lead conversion process either. So a few challenges with our org is we are a large implementation. We have several customizations. We have rules and many rules. So when we build a solution, it's very important that we pay attention to not create a quagmire of more rules, and we build a more scalable solution and keep the solution simple. And we at CenturyLink have two Salesforce development paths. One is the agile development model with our IT department, and another one is a team of Salesforce admins. And I belong to the second group here. And then we have complex Apex triggers, and any changes to our triggers require significant testing, regression testing. And our business processes are so complex that sometimes we run into this too many SOCL type errors with our triggers, and they are really hard to trap. And we spend a lot of time when we hit these errors debugging and pouring through log files. So how do we still deliver a solution to our business need and also change rapidly? So we at CenturyLink have used Process Builder and Flows for a couple of years now. The biggest reasons are we can do more without code. It's a point-and-click tool. It's fast and flexible, and it meets our business needs really quickly. It's much easier to build. We don't have to wait for a release. There are no test classes required. And the business owners can actually look at these processes and flows, and they can understand these diagrams. And that kind of transparency fosters collaboration, and that's kind of important. And another important feature is that you don't have to be a developer to use Process Builder and Flows. People with wide range of skill sets. You could be a developer. It'll be good if developers use this, or you can be an admin and you can still use this. So a vast range of skill sets can use these kinds of tools. And majority of the functions that you can do in after triggers, you can do them in a combination of Process Builder and Flows. So for these reasons, we picked a Process Builder and Flow solution for our business need. For the opportunity record type business need, we made configuration changes to our lead and opportunity object and the mapping process, and then we use these configuration changes in our process to trigger a flow to switch the opportunity record type from the default opportunity record type to the one that the user picked during the lead conversion process. And then for the service location piece, with the majority of the logic already existed in our custom lead conversion process. It was time tested, it worked very well, there were no bugs in it, so we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. So all we did is we took all that code from our existing Apex classes, and we packaged that into a method and we made that method invocable. So it's an @invocable notation. And once you do that, Process Builder will recognize that Apex method, and you can call that Apex method from Process Builder. And I'll show you that in a minute. So we reused all our existing code with respect to service location migration. So I'm going to switch to my org here and demonstrate to you all the changes that we've made, and we'll do a quick demo on lead conversion. So this is my developer org, and we created a field called opportunity record type on the lead object, and this is a pick list. So if I scroll down here, you can see all the various different record types that the user can pick from. Then we created an equivalent field, which is a text field on the opportunity object. And like the name says, opti record type from lead, this field is populated during the lead conversion process. So the description here we have is the opportunity record type that's mapped from the lead to an opportunity during lead conversion. So that's how this field is populated. And this is the field that triggers the record conversion from a process. So here's our process builder, a process that we built using process builder. So we start off with the opportunity object, and only when a record is created. So this is a new opportunity, and it's created during lead conversion, and that's when we want to swap out the record type on the opportunity. And then here you have advanced and recursion, and I don't have this box checked. Very rarely I've had to check this box, to be precise, once, because we had multiple processes on an object. And when you have multiple processes on an object, you can't control the sequence of the process. And what this is telling you is that if there is a change to this record that triggered this process mid-transaction, and that change can come from a workflow field update, from a flow field update, or from another process on this object. When that happens and you want to reevaluate the record, that's when you would check this box. And this is a good segue to a couple of documents that I want to point out to. So here's the process limits document. I'm not going to go over all the everything that's specified on this document, but I want to point out to you that you can have 50 active processes on an object, and this includes workflow rules and other rules. And what Salesforce recommends is that you have one process per object, just like how they say you have one trigger per object. But we at CenturyLink, we don't follow that to a great extent. We are not rogues either. We don't have 50 processes per object. We have less than a handful. And the reason for that is a couple of reasons, actually. We have complex business processes. So what we'd like to do is we like to bucket these processes logically. And so that way we have like 2 or 3 processes per object. And a second big reason is we have a wide variety of skill sets, and some of them are beginners, and we want to encourage everybody to use process builders and flows. So when a newcomer looks at a process that's really lengthy and they get put away by it, and we don't want that to happen, and we want more and more people to use it, so we allow them to create a new process that's kind of simple, and that's that they can test and use in production, and then they can build on top of it. So those are the 2 reasons that we have multiple processes per object. Another document is the order of execution. And when I started working on process builders and flows, I would look at this document quite often. And this document helps answer several questions, actually. If you look at this document, you can see that triggers are given priority. They before triggers and after triggers, and system validation rules, and duplicate rules, auto response rules, workflow rules, and then comes processes that are built using process builder. So you can see that process builder is kind of at the bottom of the order of execution. And this document is kind of nice, especially when you are pouring through log files and you see a particular SOCL statement getting executed many times. And that could be because of things like when there is an update of a record through a workflow, the order of execution happens again. So you can, and then here are some more clues here. Like you can see that custom validation rules, duplicate rules, and escalation rules are not run when field updates happen through workflow. But you don't see that same comment here with processes. So when through process builder, when you're running a process, your custom validation rules will trigger. So you'll kind of go scratching. I had this workflow, I had this working this certain way, and why is it not working a certain way now? And then again, like roll-up summary fields. Let's say you trigger a field update that causes your roll-up summary recalculations, and then how the order of execution happens again. So this really helps when you are looking through log files or debug files to debug certain situations. And one more tip that I'd like to mention, you probably know this, is that Process Builder runs a system, which means that your object and field level security, you don't have to worry about that. it's going to be able to update fields, and you don't have to make sure that the user has access to that field. But flows run as the user. So if you have a button on a page and you click on a button that's triggering a flow, then you have to worry about those user permissions. But one thing to note is that if that flow is triggered from a process, then it runs a system. So we'll see an example of that in our in this process that I have here. And that's kind of key because you can trigger the flows and you don't have, you know, it's running as, you can trigger the flow from the process and you know it's running a system. So now moving on to this next criteria here. The first thing I'm checking here is I'm checking to see if this opportunity was created from a lead conversion. So you have a few options here. You can choose conditions are met, you can choose formula evaluates to true, or you can say, I don't want to check for any criteria, I just want to execute this action. And if you are a beginner, when I started off in using processes, I would use these conditions are met a lot, and I do them today too. They're not as powerful as formulas in my opinion, but it's much more very handy because you can click on this, you can go to the object, you can look at fields on this object. This one's like a combo box. So if you are looking for account or fields that have the word account, it's going to do a like search on that and narrow the number of fields. You can pick something from here. I'm going to just say something like account ID, and once you choose that, you can have various kinds of operators here, like equals, not equals to, and things like that. And then here the type can be, since this is an ID field, you can put in an ID, it can be another reference, it can be a formula. And formulas here are just like formulas anywhere in Salesforce. If you've written a formula elsewhere, like on an object field, it's very similar to that. So if you look at this formula criteria that I have here, the first thing I'm checking to see if this opportunity was converted from a lead. So as you can see from this __C that this is a custom field on the opportunity object that's populated during the lead conversion. And that's how I know that this opportunity was a lead converted opportunity. And the next thing I check for is that field that we created on the opportunity, which is the opportunity record type from lead, is that blank. So I'm looking to see if the user picked a record type during the conversion process, because if the user didn't pick the record type, then that means that he is perfectly happy with his default record type and there is no need to swap the record types here. And the next thing I check for is if this value that the user has picked, which is the opportunity record type from lead, if it's different from the record type that's on the opportunity. Because sometimes the user may not know that what his or her default record type is and pick the default record type from that drop down that's on the lead page. And when they do that, there is no need to spend one more CPU and one more sockle. So to avoid that sockle of swapping the record type, so I check to see if it's different from what the standard or default record type is. So that's our criteria. So when this criteria is true, then we call a flow. So this icon here is a flow icon. And the flow is the one that's doing all the work of swapping the record type. And here are the two parameters that the flow requires. One is the opportunity ID that you want to work on. And the second is what is the new record type name. And once it has these two values, then it goes in and switches the record type on the opportunity. And we'll take a look at this flow in more detail. And that's our first business need. So we don't want to stop here. We want to evaluate the next criteria. So you would go in here and pick evaluate next criteria, because we still have our service address, our service location mapping business need to solve for. And this evaluate next criteria, you can only do that if this is an immediate action. That's why I have this lead converted check here and swapping the record type as my first action. And service address mapping is happening as a second, as a scheduled action, which is a different transaction. So I have that second in my flow here. So my second criteria here is very similar. I check to see if this is a converted lead, if it's yes. And then I have a custom setting here, which allows me to disable the execution of this visual workflow. Or in this case, an Apex method. And I will talk about this in a second here. So let me let's look at this at a high level. So you're checking to see if this is a converted opportunity that came from a lead conversion. And then this icon here is telling you that this is an invocable Apex method. Let's give it a second to refresh. Okay, there it is. And so all it's doing is it's calling that invocable Apex method that we talked about earlier. It's passing in this opportunity ID. And then why is this a scheduled action? Why can't this be an immediate action? So what we've seen is that on the converted opportunity, there is no lead ID. And remember, these service locations are on the lead. So we have to find a way to get to the lead. But what Salesforce does is that it stamps the opportunity ID on the lead record. So what we can do is we can take this opportunity ID, query the lead object using this opportunity ID, and that's how we get that lead ID. And from that lead ID, we can now traverse the related list of service locations, and then we can map them. And what we've seen is that there is a small time lag when Salesforce creates this opportunity, generates that SFTC ID, and then it looks like it's an additional step. They go in and stamp that lead record with the opportunity ID. So if we had made this as an immediate action, which we did try, and we were not able to query the lead object using this opportunity ID, we weren't getting back any records. So we want to give some time lag before we can start mapping these service locations. So we can query that lead object, give Salesforce enough time to stamp that lead record with the opportunity ID. And so we can get that lead ID and then eventually map the service locations. So if you look at the scheduled action here, we say 0 hours after create date. And hours is the lowest granularity here. So what we've seen is when we say 0 hours, it usually takes a few seconds. But I think Salesforce says it could take a few minutes as well. And in this case, we are willing to wait a few seconds to map these service locations to the converted account and the opportunity. So this is a lot, actually. And quickly, let me talk about this disable visual workflow. Although it says disable visual workflow, that's the name of our custom setting. And what we've noticed is, for us, since we are a large org, we have during releases test classes that run through the night. And when a test class triggers a process like this and triggers an asynchronous call or a scheduled action, sometimes we see that these test classes fail. And I am not exactly sure why, but I think I have a hunch. I think it's because the test classes, the life cycle is kind of small. And I think the test class completes, and then these flows are like kind of queued up, and when they execute, they're not able to make that connection back to that test class, and so it says failure to invoke a flow, and it fails. But anyway, the point is that we want to avoid these test classes from calling these asynchronous or scheduled actions. And so we have this custom setting. By default in the org, it's false. So when the user goes in to the GUI and converts the lead, this is false. This criteria evaluates to true. and the service location mapping happens. But if the in the test class itself, what the Apex class does is that it switches the flag from false to true. So then in that case, this criteria is false, and this asynchronous call or the scheduled action doesn't get executed and the test class succeeds. So we have a lot of test classes that go in, and it's only for that life of the test class, right? So it switches that custom setting to true, and the criteria becomes false, and you don't execute any of your scheduled actions. So this is pretty standard practice for us, where we bypass scheduled actions in test classes. So if you look at this flow, if you take a step back, it looks really simple. It just has two criteria, and it's doing two things. But there are so many different concepts here that we touched on. We touched on immediate actions. We touched on calling flows. We touched on evaluate the next criteria rather than stopping the process in between. And we talked about scheduled actions, custom settings, and how to bypass execution of a flow or any other scheduled action. And in this case, we are calling an invocable Apex method. So this is great synergy between the admin team and the IT department. So we can reuse a lot of code that's already in there and save time by doing that. And so there is a lot of information in this particular flow, and I can show you how we can dig deeper into this flow, update record type, and we can take a look at the flow and see how we've designed it. But if you have any questions regarding this particular process, I can take them now. So Jennifer, if you have any questions, let me know.
Currently, there are none in the queue.
Okay, good. So moving on to flows. So this is our flow. It's very simple. It's just 3 boxes here. So you're doing a record lookup. So the first thing this does is, remember, it has 2 input parameters from the process, which is the opportunity ID and the record type name. So what it's doing is it's querying a custom metadata type, which is of type MDT, and that tells you it's a custom metadata type. And I can show you how this custom metadata type looks. So if you go into settings and you say custom metadata types, that's how you would get to it. There it is. Once you get here, then you can go in and create a new custom metadata type. So in this case, I have one here, which is lead to opportunity record type, and you can add standard custom fields to it, just like how you would add to objects. And I have 2 fields here, which is the record type, opportunity record type, and then the Salesforce record type ID. And to add values to this, you would go into manage lead to that manage button. And if you look at this, these are the 2 fields that I was talking about. One is the record type, which is just like on the lead object that we looked at. And then here are the equivalent opportunity record type ID. So we need this SFTC ID to stamp that opportunity with this particular ID. And that's why we're querying this custom metadata type. And so that's all it's doing. It's looking up this custom metadata type for this lead opportunity record type. The name is being passed in here, and then it checks to see. It takes the value, that's the SFTC ID, and puts it into a new variable here. I like to name my variables with a VAR, so as soon as I look at it, I know it's a variable. And similarly, my constants, I'll say CONST for constants. And so I have my own little naming standard, so I can keep things straight. And I always check this box just in case you don't find a particular record type name that you're looking for. So let's say you have a new record type name in your org, and you add it to the lead object, but you don't add it up here, then there could be an error. And then I check to see a decision. Did I get back anything? And if I did, then all I do here is I update the opportunity record type with so here's the update to the opportunity. update the opportunity where the ID is this variable var opti ID. Remember, it's coming from the process. And then you're updating the record type ID with this value. So if you go back to this, we're updating it. Let's say I pick Savas, then I'm updating it with this value. So that's how we're swapping or changing the record type. So let's quickly look at a demo here. So this is my lead, and this is the where the user would go in and pick a record type. I'm just going to pick something here, and my default is light speed. So if I didn't pick something from the drop down, it'll switch to, it'll use my default record type of light speed. But this here I'm picking Savas. I'm going to click convert, and it's going to take me to the standard lead conversion page. And I am going to say create a new account, and let's click the convert button. This takes a couple of seconds. And so here's the account name. This is the duplication rules that I was talking about. So my account name had Utopia in it, and we have another Utopia in here. Ideally, we'd like the user to go in and pick, and if there are multiple duplicates, they'll show up here. We would like the user to pick something from here rather than create a new one. But in this case, I'm just going to create a new account just so we can look at it. It's not cluttered, just for demo purposes. So that's going to take a couple of seconds here. Okay, so there is our account, and I'm going to give it a couple more seconds to populate the related lists here. Okay, so there's our opportunity that we created. And if you look at, I'm hovering over it, so look at the far right, you can see the record type is what I picked in that drop down. And that's how the user was able to pick the record type. And if you look at the service locations, they still haven't mapped. Remember, it's an asynchronous process. So if you go to flows, and then you, let me refresh this, and there it is. So you can see that this flow, it's waiting to call that asynchronous process of the scheduled action. So I know when this completes, and then if I go into my account and refresh my screen, I should be able to see that service locations. But by just looking at this here, that it's waiting in the queue to execute, I can tell that it's working. Now switching back to my screens here. I want to quickly talk about debugging, because debugging can sometimes be cumbersome. Some of the top errors that we hit is too many socle errors, and in this case, it's very important to turn on debugging logs. And debugging can be, the log files can be hard to read. So what I do is I make workflow finest, and I make sure I turn off debugging for like Apex if I'm not interested in it. And that way I make my debug log file smaller, and then I can focus on what I'm actually looking for. And sometimes what happens is when we put a process in production and we get this too many socle errors, it almost seems like you caused the issue, right? But it's not necessarily true, because it could be the straw that broke the camel's back. It could be that order of executions. Just look to see if there are the issues somewhere else, and maybe that your process just surfaced that issue. Maybe there are field updates that are happening often and just triggering that order of execution over and over again. And then another exception that we run into is field integrity exception. And this is like where, for example, let's say Salesforce is expecting an opportunity ID, and you go in and put in a lead ID into that field. And during runtime, you'll get this field integrity exception. And another exception that recently has struggled with this is the mixed DML operation. So you can't update a setup object like user and a non-setup object, let's say like contacts, in the same transaction. You'll have to split out that transaction. That's a Salesforce thing, because you can't give permissions, and you can't make a change to another non-setup object in the same transaction. So where we've run into this issue is we have processes where when we create a user, we would have to create an equivalent contact record. And so we had to make the creation of the contact record and scheduled action, and we had to split it out to avoid this mixed DML operation. The next common error is all or none error, and this one we've run into this very rarely, but it usually happens when you had doing like a fast create or like a bunch of records you're trying to insert, or a bunch of records that you're trying to update. And when you have that situation and one of them is bad or a couple of them are bad, then you get this all or none, because by default Salesforce is saying I'm going to commit this to the database all at once or nothing at all. And to do that, to debug that, you would have to turn on debugging. At least that's what I do. And then I can see which one is faulty, and we can fix that and keep going. And some more tips here is that email. So the person who activated the flow or the process gets the error emails. And lately I've seen that these emails look much better than they did in the past. They have so much information that these emails are good enough for me most of the times to debug an issue in production and to see why it's something is failing. And then I have to accept that we are not the best in adding fault screens. We should probably get better at that. But when there is an error, the user gets a message saying that failed to trigger a flow 301, blah, 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 that weird, with the Salesforce ID. And so how do you know what that ID translates to, right? So we use Workbench, and Workbench is really cool and easy to use, and that helps us translate that ID to a flow. And it helps us in a large organization, because we have so many different people doing flows and processes, to see who the developer is on this process, and then we can ask for help from that developer by using that translation that Workbench gives us. We talked about log files and adding screens to flows. This is something that I use during development, because what I do is I add all those input parameters. I add an element or a screen saying input parameters delete me, so I know to delete it. So I hard code the input parameters in there. And if I don't do that, then if I'm testing my flow constantly, before I know it, I have like 20 versions of that flow. So to keep it simple, I hard code the IDs in there in a screen on the flow, first element, and then I say these are my IDs. So that way I know it's working for this particular case, and then that's the majority of it. And then when I'm ready and that's working, I delete that and activate the flow and hook it to a process or a button or however you want to do it, and continue my testing. And that helps me quite a bit, actually. So some of the advantages with Process Builder is this particular business need. Like if we didn't have Process Builder, Salesforce didn't have these tools like flows and Process Builders, what would it be, right? So then we would have to do this in a trigger as an opportunity after trigger. That's Apex code. We would have to do an agile user story. It would mean prioritizing the story against our other stories. We'd have to wait in a queue, and then we have to wait for a release to deploy. And we just went ahead with the solution like a week ago as part of our May deployment. And if we didn't have Process Builder and flows, this would have been like an August deployment. So we gained 3 months in using this particular solutions, and that's huge. And then we used change sets to deploy the processes and flows from our sandbox to production. So we tested it thoroughly in our sandbox before we moved it to production. And in this case, we had to wait for a deploy because we had that invocable Apex method. And we built this whole thing because we had the code already existing for the service locations, and we just had to build a couple of processes and flows. And so those took less than a week, and so we did gain a lot of time and by using this particular solution. And so for CenturyLink itself, quickly, this is a huge philosophy shift for us to move from powerful Apex developer tools to more tools like config tools. And biggest advantage, again, is clicks and configuration versus Apex code. And we use most of the features, record creates, actions we call flows, cross objects, invocable Apex methods, and now we're even beginning to use it for approvals. And what we've seen is great synergy between Process Builder and Visual Workflow. It's as powerful as Apex code and with much less overhead. And this is a slide that my boss, Don Raposa, and myself, we presented at Dreamforce. It's the prior product director for Flows and Process Builder, Shelly Erseg. We were 1 year into using Process Builder and Flows, and we had saved $65,800 in a year, and that's kind of big for our group. And this is much more now. The reason being, Salesforce comes out with new features, and we're always looking to use them, and we jump on those new features. And another big reason is it's so easy to use, and we have more and more people who are excited to use these tools in our company, and that really helps us with more cost savings. And then I have some useful links here, and that's pretty much it. I would like to really thank Jennifer, Rakesh, and David for giving me this opportunity to speak at Automation Hour. I think this is such a cool forum for everybody to learn and look at other people's implementation, because there's always that you can continue learning. And even if I miss some of this, I kind of try and watch these on YouTube to see if I can learn something from this particular forum. So thank you guys for this, and thank you all for listening to this presentation. So back to you, Jennifer.
Great. So we do have a couple questions. So the first one from Jarvis is, why did we use a custom metadata type for the solution? Could we have more examples of where we could use custom metadata types?
Yeah, so if you look at custom metadata type, the way I look at it is it's like custom settings that with the list option. So let me see if I can go back to that. So this is our custom metadata type. So custom metadata type is relatively newer than custom settings, and the data itself is metadata. That's what is cool about it. So you can package this in your package.xml file, deploy it. You can use change sets to move this, and it's not just the header that moves, it's the whole thing, because the data itself is metadata. Think of it as metadata within metadata, and that's the power of it. But in this case, you're right, it's kind of a simple use case. And I could have used, because there's 5 records here, and I could have used a custom setting with the list option rather than the hierarchical option, and that would have worked as well. But I still think going forward, if I can use metadata, I would continue using it, even if it's simple. The biggest reason being the data itself is metadata, and it can be packaged more. And we have so many different sandboxes. So when we refresh all of that, I have all of that, and I have one less thing to worry about. I hope that helps.
Great. So the next question is from Dominique. She has 2. Do you think we would need to focus on decoupling Apex code to think of ways to use Process Builder?
Decoupling Apex code. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by decoupling. But if you are, here's our strategy. If you can do it in Process Builder and Flows, I would recommend strongly that you do that, because it's so much more faster, if that's what you mean by decoupling from Apex. But if you already have Apex code that's working beautifully, it's all time tested and it's doing well, and you want to call it from Process Builder, just ask your developer to switch it to an invocable method, and you invoke that. That way you know it's working. All you're doing is just calling it. But the biggest for us, and I'm sure this is true for every org, is waiting for that release cycle when you have Apex code, having those test classes, having them run through the night before you can do a fast deploy, and waiting for logging in stories in Rally, waiting for your time for in the queue to get your story processed because you have to wait for a developer. And since this is a wide range of skills, people with wide range of skill sets, can use this. And the business owners probably can even build using process builders and flows. So when we have a new story, we first look at process builder and flows. And if we can solve it using that, we take this approach. And if we can't, then we go to Apex. And believe it or not, 95% of the time we can use just process builder and flows and solve majority of our business needs. So maybe if you can help elaborate what you mean by decoupling.
So she did. So it's to remove. So take a look at existing Apex code in her org, which is very, very code heavy, and to then move it over to process builder flow.
So if you are doing that, I wouldn't do that if there's no issue with that code. But if, let's say, from a scalability perspective, let's say you want to improve the functionality or make enhancements to that, then you can look at your process builder and flow solution to add on to that Apex code. But let's say that Apex code is causing too much SOCL errors and you don't have resources to debug it. It's taking in an enormous amount of time to debug any issues like that. Then I would say, yeah, go ahead and comment out that code, because it's so much more easier to build it out in process builder and flows, and so much more easier to debug. And that way you don't have to wait for a developer resource to help you debug that situation. Those are some of the reasons that I can think of, but it totally depends on your business. So whether you want to keep that or whether you want to switch it to process builder and flows. Like in our case here, that service location mapping, it was working beautifully in Apex. I didn't have to understand what it's doing. All I needed to know is it's a black box. I pass in this input parameter, I get this output. And if that's working for me, why rebuild it? But if that wasn't working for me and it was causing issues like too many SOCL errors, I didn't know what it meant, then I would scrap that, comment that out, and build it out in process builder and flow. And or if there's major enhancements to it and we don't have a developer resource, then I would go ahead and start enhancing it in process builders and flows. Those are the few things that I can think of, but totally depends on your business need. Sorry if I repeated myself there.
Okay, and then the next question is, do you find the process of creating, activating, testing, and deactivating, cloning, editing, and saving as very time-consuming using process builder?
Yes, I couldn't agree with you more. Whoever said that to you, clap, clap. And I hope Salesforce is listening to this. I wish we could make that a little bit easier. Like even this criteria, I wish you could do like a Control-C, Control-V, or some way to copy it. And but here's the deal. Sometimes you're willing to put up with that instead of waiting in line for 3 months, right, to get your story executed. So that's the trade-off. And you can find more people to build processes and flows than you can have people to write Apex code. And even Apex code, you have to write a test class. That's pretty cumbersome too. You have to get code coverage of 75%, and you're spending like half a day to a day trying to get that last 5% of code coverage before it can go in. So it's not like you have a best solution either way, but whoever suggested that, you can go ahead and put an idea in the idea exchange to make this more friendly like that, to copy, paste, activate. Yep.
All right, and then we have another question from Keith. Do process builder flows ever cause unit Apex test failures? If so, any tips for preventing failures in tests when developing new flows?
So I did talk about that briefly, right? So they do cause, like the scheduled actions, anything for that matter. It's not any different from any other configuration. For example, you change a validation rule. It could cause your test class to fail. You could, so in large organizations, it's hard to keep up with changes, and you kind of have to anticipate it. There's no perfect solution to that. So that's why I talked about how to bypass using custom settings, how to bypass calling scheduled actions, because that was a pain point for us. Those would invariably fail. So how so that our Apex developers can bypass these scheduled actions by changing their test classes, changing that custom setting in their test classes. So you have to kind of work with your development team. When you run unit tests, you copy everybody who needs to be copied on it. So people who know when, let's say you changed a validation rule, you added a new process, you added a new flow, it's causing a failure to a test class. So if, let's say I'm copied on it and I know that, oh, this was my process, and I do that, I am copied on some of this, and I say, hey, this is mine. Let me take a look at it. So, but eventually, end of the day, you do get a lot of benefit. You save a lot of time by, like the cost savings that I showed you. Those are just the tangible savings, but the intangible savings of the 3 months, like in this case, that the business is enjoying a new feature by using these easier to use tools. I think is a bigger benefit than if you are breaking a particular test class, which you can fix if you know what the issue is.
Okay, I'm going to ask folks if there are any other questions since we've reached the end of them. So I'll just give a minute for folks to type away. Great, I'm not seeing any new ones come in. Okay, so I guess that's it for our questions. Thanks so much today for your presentation. I found it quite helpful, and I hope others in the audience did as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, thanks everybody.
Bye.